Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we're walking through how to be a great facilitator. Now, a facilitator is someone who facilitates a group of people so that they can make progress or reach a consensus, and an effective facilitator remains fully independent of the group. They don't influence or lead the group to an outcome, and that means if you're a facilitator, you'll need to put aside your own views and lead the event from an impartial standpoint. Now, a facilitator will encourage participants to discuss all of the issues openly, and that will increase the chances of the group agreeing a way forward. And finally, an effective facilitator will use a facilitation process to help them prepare for and deliver their session. And that process can also help them guide the session to their desired outcome. Now, sometimes people involved in education or training will call themselves a facilitator, and these are people who help their participants gain some understanding of something they don't know before. Now, because they are delivering information to their audience, they are not a facilitator, and there are some other roles you should be aware are not facilitation, and these include a presenter, so they run a public event or broadcast information. That's not the same as facilitation. A trainer, they're going to deliver specific knowledge to teach skills. That is not the same as facilitation. An arbitrator will judge a dispute. Again, that's not the same as facilitation. A mediator intervenes to help people resolve a dispute. Again, that is not the same as facilitation. And finally, a negotiator conducts negotiations to reach an agreement, but they do so to reach an agreement that is in their interest. Again, that is not the same as facilitation. So the central role of a facilitator is to run a group meeting to reach a consensus. But there's a lot that must happen before this meeting can take place. And the facilitation process consists of 5 stages. So the first stage is scope, and that's an assessment of what is needed to make the event successful. Next, we have design, and that involves designing the structure of the meeting and creating the agenda. Next, we have prepare, and that means all the things you need to do to organize the event. Finally, we have facilitating the event itself, and that just means the basic running of the event. And finally, we have capture value, and that means documenting the relevant session outcomes and the key points made during the session itself. Now, note that in the diagram, items in yellow represent things which happen before the event, and items in green represent things which happen either during or after the event. So with that, let's jump in a little bit more and look at each of these stages in a bit more detail. So first we have scope, and to avoid going off topic, you need to clearly define the scope of the event. And to do this, you'll need to talk to the people involved, find out what they think is important to them, and then you can use this information to define what topics should be included or left out of scope. Now, having boundaries is going to make it easier to run the event. So, for example, sometimes people will come to a meeting with their own agenda, but when you have a clearly defined scope, you can easily manage this type of problem. Now, some key questions you will need to answer in this stage include: who needs to be involved? What's the objective of the session overall? What are the obvious conflicts between stakeholders? And how will you ensure you stay on track during the session? Next, we have design, and this involves determining the event structure and then outlining an agenda. Now, as things don't always go to plan, you should keep your schedule flexible to allow for changes during the event itself. Now, another thing to do is to consider how you're going to deliver the session such that it suits your objective. So, for example, a brainstorming session can help you generate ideas, whereas a more workshop-oriented session can help you solve problems. And some key questions you'll need to consider or answer during this stage include: how will you deliver the event? What will the agenda be? And you need to include timings and room for refreshment breaks, etc. Another question is: how will you measure the success of each part of the agenda? And finally, how long will the session take? Next we have prepare, and to prepare for the event you'll need to organise all the elements of the session, including logistics, the venue, the attendees and any supplies you need. Now it can be a good idea to meet at a neutral venue and also to check well in advance that everyone is available to attend. And some key decisions that need to be made during this phase include what venue are you going to use, and obviously, as we just said, ensure that everyone can attend. You'll need to organise any catering and refreshments you want. You'll need to organise any materials or resources you need to run the event, such as flip boards, for example. And finally, you should plan on arriving early at the venue to ensure you have time to prepare it for the session to run smoothly from the very beginning. So next we run on to facilitate the event, and finally at this stage it's time to actually run the event. Now you can get the group engaged straight away by explaining the agenda. You can describe the objectives of the session and set the ground rules to ensure individuals engage productively. Now, an icebreaker session can get people warmed up, and to frame the big picture, you should then invite key people to outline important background information. And once you've done all that, then it's time to start the main discussion. And your job essentially is to help the group achieve the objectives in the available time. Now, one common challenge you'll face is to surface unknown needs that lead the discussion towards your objective. And one approach to do this is to break the group into smaller teams to discuss elements of the overall topic. And once they've done that, they can then feed back their ideas into the room, and you can ask questions to draw out further insights that the group may not see for themselves. And finally, you need to prioritize all the points made to support the overall objective and make sure that any decisions agreed on by the group are recorded. So some key things to think about during this phase. You need to use the agenda obviously as a guide for the day. You need to remember to take a neutral position. You need to actively listen to what's being said, as well as what's not being said. And you should paraphrase or mirror back to everyone so that everyone understands what's being said and agreed. You should encourage participants to adopt shared ownership of the outcomes. That's going to make them more likely to want to progress the meeting towards an outcome. Obviously, you'll need to manage the timing of the workshop. And finally, you'll need to adapt as needed to drive the session towards a successful conclusion. So the final stage of the 5-step facilitation process is to capture value. And during the session, you'll need to document the main ideas and decisions. And the idea is to capture the kind of story or the narrative of the session. Now, you should close each stage by reviewing agreed points to confirm that everyone does indeed agree. Now, if you do have access to an assistant, then you could ask them to document the session as it proceeds. And that's going to help you concentrate on your job of ensuring the meeting is progressing and staying on track. Now, there are a few things here again to remember to ensure this phase runs smoothly. So obviously you need to remember to record the event effectively. You need to seek agreement of any critical points with the group. You need to make a note of any key ideas and any key words that keep recurring. You need to distill the main points from what's said and also what's not said. You need to identify any ongoing actions, and you should own and take responsibility for those actions. And obviously, you should also make a note of who was present at the event so you can make sure everyone gets any notes you've created from the event. Now, it's highly likely your session will run differently than planned. And as an effective facilitator, you can use a range of skills to handle difficulties as they come up during your session. So firstly, imagine you experience a lack of engagement. Well, when a person in the group appears distracted or disinterested, one tactic you can use is to direct questions explicitly at them to regain their active participation. Secondly, you might encounter difficult people. Now, some people can be disruptive and there's always going to be people who disagree, but you should give these people a chance to express their views so that they are heard. But remember to keep discussions in line always with the session rules And if you need to, don't be afraid to take disruptive people to one side and set things straight so the meeting can keep moving forward. Now, you might encounter clashing group dynamics, and it's natural that during a group discussion, individuals' views might clash, and everyone is, of course, entitled to their viewpoint. But remember that it's your job to help the group find common ground. And one way you can do this is to frequently paraphrase or mirror back what is being said or not said. And that's going to help at least filter out the important points from the noise. Now, another tactic you can use is to use breakout groups for difficult topics to be debated and brainstormed. And in doing that, you can try to put individuals with varying viewpoints into similar discussion groups. Now, you might have a lot of type A personalities in the room, and it is natural for leaders to seek to control proceedings. But here, it's important to remember that in your session, all participants are on a level playing field. And if your session includes subgroup work, you could try giving type A's a leading role, and that's going to meet some of their needs to control some of the proceedings. Now, you can also limit the amount of time each individual gets to speak, and that way you're ensuring that every individual can participate and speak on an equal footing because they have an equal time frame to speak. Now, another problem you might encounter is low energy. Now, if the discussion has gone on for a while and energy is really starting to flag, then it could be a good idea to have an impromptu quick break so that people can refresh. You might have people interrupting you. Now, people who persistently interrupt possibly have something useful to share, and you can handle this in 2 steps. So firstly, you can demonstrate your role as an effective facilitator by repeating the rules of engagement. And secondly, you could offer that person a later time slot to share their views. That way they can express their views in full rather than repeatedly interrupting proceedings. Next, you might find yourself going off track. And if you do this and you're running short of time, then a good idea is to remind people of the scope of the meeting. And secondly, if necessary, agree on a revised agenda with the group quickly to bring everything back on track. And finally, if you find yourself running out of time, which is a very common thing to do, sometimes there just won't be time to discuss all the issues during the session. So what you can do is you can park them for later and assign someone to take responsibility for them. So in summary, following the 5-stage facilitation process will help you to be an effective facilitator or to facilitate a meeting to the best of your ability. And the 5 stages are scope, design, prepare, facilitate event, and finally capture value. Now, taking some time to do the necessary background research and planning is going to ensure you have the information to design as good a process as you can for your session. And following the facilitation process will give the group the best chance of reaching the outcome you hope to reach. So that's it for this lesson. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.